Hey everyone, welcome to the Speed Seekers podcast. Today's guest is Andy Pilgrim, who I'm sure you know is one of the winningest sports car drivers around. Was a factory driver for Corvette and Cadillac, and has driven, I don't know, Andy, I think you've driven just about everything, and you're also a huge proponent for, I guess, new driver education and teen driving and all of that kind of stuff. So helping save a lot of lives on the road. And I know also in your spare time, you do some journalism work as well for a variety of different media outlets. So, hey, we're going to have some fun talking. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Ross. It's a pleasure to be back.
I think it was actually, I actually looked, it was just over 2 years ago, way back on episode 107 that you and I did this thing before. And we did spend a fair amount of time talking about the work you do with your Traffic Safety Education Foundation, the nonprofit that you created, and all the work. And I got to tell you, I had a lot of people sending me emails afterwards saying, "Oh, that is so cool the way you're working to save lives on the road." So that was a cool experience. You also shared some really cool stories about when you co-drove with Dale Earnhardt Sr. and Jr. at Daytona. So you've had a pretty darn interesting career. And that's kind of what I thought would be really fun to talk about is you've been driving cars for a long time. How have you been able to keep this going for so long and be so successful for so long? Some drivers seem to come in, they're a big flash, they make a big name for themselves, and then they kind of fade away. You've been winning races for a long time.
I've been very fortunate, Ross, and I appreciate you saying that because there's a lot of great guys that I have seen, come and go over the years for various reasons. Some people make different life choices along the way, and racing didn't quite maybe give the income they thought it would or some whatever. But you're right. I think the thing that keeps me interested and keeps me with such a different or a younger spirit in this is because, Ross, I didn't get a chance to get in a race car till I was 27 years old.
Yeah.
And I didn't race anything as a kid, no go-karts, no nothing. Economically, that was just out of the question. When I did race something, it was because I had a job out of school as a computer programmer and I had an old motorcycle and I basically put numbers on it, wired up the drain plug, and I was racing it in England. I didn't even have a truck or trailer to get there. I either rode the bike to the racetrack or I had a friend of mine with a bread van, stick it in the back of the bread van and drop me off at the racetrack, and he'd either pick me up at the hospital or at the racetrack later on in the day. So it was an interesting start. So I did that for 2 years, and then I got hired to come to the States. But again, the idea of racing a car it wasn't possible. It just wasn't financially feasible. But then ultimately, it was just like I ended up with going to the States and getting an opportunity I had a good job here and ended up with getting hold of a Renault Cup car. And I think that was the most amazing thing. For $6,500, I got this secondhand Renault Cup car and ended up getting Rookie of the Year and moving into cars. And it just started like that. And I think the enthusiasm with ever getting in a car or ever getting in a race car that somebody else had been working on and getting to drive it was just such a great opportunity, a great feeling. And then to work up to getting into semi-professional races, getting into race teams where people would give you a seat and pay you a little money. All of that started in the late 1980s into the 90s and 2000s. And I don't know whether it's just luck or judgment, but some of the moves we make and some of the people that we drive, and when we get an opportunity to move up into a different level of race car, it's just incredible that those opportunities have kept coming. And with no personal sponsor, maybe I won races at the right time, or impressed team owners at the right time, or impressed engineers at the right time. But it has kept going. And even to today, I'm lucky enough to be driving for a team, and they pay me to do it, which is it's not like I'm living off it now. But I've always had a tremendous enjoyment level. It didn't matter whether I was testing a Mazda 3 for a car magazine at a racetrack and a production car, or whether I was in a McLaren Senna at the same racetrack later, or I was in a GT3 car, or I'm in a touring car, or a champ car. It's just been, I think the enthusiasm level is there. And of course, you have to stay fit, talking in other terms. But the driving part, the enthusiasm and the opportunities have certainly kept coming.
Well, obviously, winning helps, right?
You
win,
it does.
people come knocking on your door. So that's something you've been able to do. But I'm wondering, as you were talking about that, I wonder how many drivers, kind of their sole purpose is, I want to make a living driving race cars. I want to be a professional race car driver. And then there are drivers who are, I just want to keep doing what I love to do, and I'll see where I end up. And I don't know which one you were and whether that has an impact on that.
No, I don't think so, Ross. I think I didn't have a goal and a path that was set. Yeah. And when I got into these cars initially, I understood, I was a computer programmer, right? Maybe I'm a bit more analytical than some. And obviously, not obviously, but I was making a living off that. And that was something I could go into. But when it came down to getting into race cars, I didn't immediately understand how much I didn't know. But when I understood how much I didn't know a little bit more, it became something that I could learn. And I'm a fast learner. And I think once I was learning and once I realized I was progressing, I was always looking for a way to progress further. But it wasn't a question of getting sponsors to do it. It was, like you say, if you happen to impress someone and win a pro race, even in the early days, the Firestone Firehawk series, for instance, was incredibly competitive. If you were winning races in Firestone Firehawk and your name was sort of unknown, suddenly you were getting a little bit known. And I think, again, it's just making the right moves or winning races at the right time. But one of the biggest things I saw in those first 10 years where I was getting paid and other people were getting paid and there were a lot of good drivers around was, for, again, luck or judgment or some obviously skill. Yes. When I got an opportunity to move up or I got an opportunity to drive something else, it seemed like, okay, I knew that this was a really good opportunity. And I guess I was mentally ready to step up, and I did what I needed to do. And I can name 8 or 9 times when I got an opportunity to move up to something else or stood in because somebody else couldn't make it, one of those things, and I didn't mess up. And I did see so many guys who were really good coming up. When they got that opportunity, they made a mistake or they had some bad luck. And you really didn't see them again after that much at all. Yeah. So I think some recognition of an opportunity and making the best of what you had, making the best of a bad car. You and I both know how to do that, things like that, Ross. And there must have been some grassroots skill in there somewhere, but I knew nothing when I started, but I could follow somebody and figure stuff out before data. Good guys, like the Archer brothers, for instance, in showroom stock racing, Tommy and Bobby. They were so good in these cars. And I remember following them in old Corvette C4s and just figuring out what they were doing to a degree. They were really good. And I just worked my way to get there, but I didn't go crashing into turn 5 at the same speed the first time. I realized I was losing speed on the entry. So the next time I would work up to it. And maybe that methodical approach helped as well somewhat.
Yeah.
Lots of different reasons, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, there's no simple answer to that. But I mean, you and I were talking that we get a lot of emails from people saying, how do I make it in racing? And, rather than the simple, start with a big budget, starting to think about, maybe it's part of the analytical part of the way you think. But, one thing I was thinking about there was some drivers, they're too anxious to move up and they're not ready, because you pointed out, like, you were always ready. And I think some drivers are just so focused on, I got to get to the next level. I got to get to the next level. I got to get to the next level, that they're not really ready to make that step. And then there are some that stay in some place too long because it's comfortable. And
yes, sure.
so
sure.
I think you bring up a good point of just being ready to make that move when the opportunity arises.
Mental strength is huge. Mental strength is huge, and I think is underestimated so much. It's not just the knowledge of what to do, it's having the mental strength to understand. Today, you may only have a sixth place car because you hit a curb early and you've got a little less camber. So you bring it home sixth. But on the last couple of laps, the guys in third and fourth crashed into each other and you ended up with a podium. Yeah. But if you'd have really pushed the car and blown out the inside of the left front tire because you were pushing so hard to, you know what I mean? It's like people say, well, that was just pure luck. But sometimes you make your luck,
Yeah. And I've always said you have to be in position to take advantage of luck as well. Because to your point of, if you've got a sixth place car and you try to win the race early with it, or after you've banged a curb or whatever, and now the tire is gone and you're in pit lane, well, you weren't even in position to take advantage of those third and fourth place cars banging into
when they went off. Yeah. And
I've
won races that way. I remember one particular World Challenge race in 1997 where the first and second place cars took each other out and I was in third place. I couldn't stay with them. I ended up winning the race.
So I'm curious, what did that do to your mindset, your confidence when that happened? Like, did it have any impact on that? Because I know some drivers who, and you'd already won races by that point, but some drivers who, they were in a series and hadn't quite won, and all of a sudden they get lucky, I'm doing in air quotes here, and they end up winning, but all of a sudden it's like the floodgates open and now I can win these things. Did it have any impact on you?
I don't think so, to be honest. Because I'm a realist. First of all, I would have said, it's great that I won the race, but I won the race because those guys fell off and took each other out, essentially, in that case. So I don't think so. I think the confidence inside has to be there that you can do the best you can do. And there are some days when let's say I early on, there were things that I didn't understand about driving certain racetracks that I had to learn. And when I maybe came back later, a year later, 2 years later, and I'd realized what the changes were the next time I was there, maybe I learned it in the race and I got beat. But then the next time back, I was better. And then maybe I ended up winning. And that I think you've just always got to learn, take the good with the bad, take the lucky and understand it's lucky, and just say, I can be better. I couldn't stay with those other guys in that race, but car apart, what can I learn? And driving at the beginning, like I say, the Archer brothers and others like Stu Hayner were really fast in those cars, and I was trying to get there, and I did get there in the Corvette Challenge. Everybody was in pretty much the same car. You assume nobody's cheating, right? But it was winning those races were not easy with all kinds of great drivers in that series. And then you move into other areas where you've got Thierry Boutsen in the car with you, and you've got Bob Wallach, and you've got Allan McNish, and you've got Johnny O'Connell as your teammate, you've got Ron Fellows, and you've got these guys, and it's like looking at the data, there were things that I could learn all the way up. I did not know the basics when I started a car race. I just had a seat and I could fly a car and I could slide a car in the sense that it didn't worry me or bother me. But when it came to hairpins, when it came to slow mid-speed corners, early on, I was smooth and fast, but I was not making the most of the corners. And I remember learning this from following people like Scott Pruitt, and they were so disciplined in certain parts, like entries to slow corners. It was only years later that I saw on the data what they were doing when we started having loads of data analysis. And I think it's so important. I don't care how fast you are. There's always going to be somebody faster, maybe not on the racetrack, but even if you're the fastest guy, and I look at data, there may have been my teammate may have been faster on 3 corners. Yeah. So I can go faster. I think I'm just hungry. I've always been hungry to learn and hungry to go do better, but it's just my nature. Yeah. Can I keep learning? I'm just always hungry for knowledge. I read books. I study things. It's my nature. I'm a nerd.
Yeah, right. But a good nerd, yeah, that way. And I think actually, I've when I've been done talks and presentations and workshops and things like that, and I people say, well, what does it take to make it? And there's the usual answer that people want to hear. You got to be brave. You got to have quick reflexes. You got to do, all this. And I go, in the end, it comes down to how bad do you want it and how much do you want to learn? Because the very, very best drivers I know, they could have just lapped the field 3 times and they'll get out of the car and they'll go, well, how could I have done that better? There was that great story. Jacques Dallaire had that program with Dan Marisi, and Dan Marisi passed away a bunch of years ago. But
Human Performance International, I know them both well. I knew Dan, but Dr. Dallaire, I still know Jacques.
Yeah. And I think you and I both went through that program, and Dan told me the story of the time when he was at the very first Grand Prix that Ayrton Senna ever won. It was in Portugal. He was driving the Lotus. It poured rain. He, just dominated. One of those great Ayrton Senna stories, right? He just dominated. And Dan was telling me that 3 hours after the race, because Dan had been around talking to different teams and drivers afterwards, but 3 hours after the race, practically everybody's gone other than the teams just packing up the trucks, right? And Dan is walking back to his rental car in the parking lot, and he looks up and there's a car coming off the track and coming through the paddock area and through the parking lot. And he looks up and it's Senna. And because he'd worked with Senna, he kind of waves to him, and Senna pulls up and he goes, Ayrton, what are you doing? And Senna says, I'm trying to figure out how I could have done it better. And it's like, wow, like that's what it takes to be a Senna.
Yes, absolutely. That's it. It's the mental side of it, the drive, anyone who thinks they did the best lap ever anywhere, it's like, nah, not quite. There's always improvement. Nicky Katzberg was a teammate in 2016. Nicky, I think, is one of the best GT drivers in the world currently. And I learned stuff off Nicky. I mean, in 16 at Watkins Glen, I was looking at his data and seeing what he did. And I learned from Nicky in those cars. And those cars, the 16 GT3R Porsche was not easy. It was very tricky on the back of the car, and the brake system was a little bit strange. But I love to get data and analyze it and see where I can do it. And it's sometimes hard to check. Even when you see it in the data, it's sometimes hard to do it.
So can I ask you to share maybe some details of, because you've mentioned some of the co-drivers you've had and through the years, and a time where you're looking at whether it's Ron Fellows or Johnny O or Katzberg or whoever, right? And you're looking there and you're going, oh, like there's a technique or a way to approach braking or turning the steering wheel or getting on the gas, which are the 3 things that we do. Yeah. Can you share like a little detail of that somebody would go, ooh, I need to think about that myself?
I think I can. It's actually Johnny's data. And Johnny's super quick in the Cadillac, super quick in everything he's driven. His data was different to mine, but I didn't notice immediately because we were very close. I mean, we were very close in lap times. And it was sometimes down to a fraction of a tenth or 0.2 in qualifying. And Johnny would beat me. It's like, damn, he beat me. And so I'd look at it and go, okay, I did a good lap. He did a great lap. But where I found the differences with Johnny's data was in the slower corners, mid-speed and slower corners in the dead area on the way in. And you can just see this little bump in the data where he would get off the brake and just do a quick blip of the throttle, a tiny quick blip of the gas, and he would just gain half of a tenth. And it wasn't in the fast corners. There was nothing there in the fast corners. There was, but in the slow to medium corners, almost every single one, he would gain a fraction of a tenth, if you like, in 2 or 3 corners. And that ended up sometimes being the difference. And it was consistent. And I said, dude, why do you do that? He said, well, I don't know. He wasn't explicit. He wasn't hiding anything, but he said, yeah, I think it might have been something I did in karting, or it's just, but essentially thinking, I thought about it and I went, you know what? I can try that. It's not easy to do it, but once you do it on the way into the corner, it's just a tiny bit of gas. So when you come off the brake and you know the car's in that dead area, you've got the car under control, the tires are gripping well, and you not have a massive amount of understeer, but it's sort of that dead area before you start getting back to a full balanced throttle. Right before you go back to balanced throttle, you just blip it. You don't go down to the floor. You just give it a quick blip. You can barely feel it, but it's like half of a tenth of a tenth. You know, it's there and it's real. And it's like, that's cheating. And yeah, but it wasn't cheating, of course. It was a really clever technique. And that's something that I've been doing since I learned that. And I learned that from Johnny O.
Well, it's interesting as you're talking about that and telling that story. I'm thinking, how many times that I've actually had to stop a driver from doing that too. Like, for example,
you know what you said. I know what you're going to say. Yep.
You know, the classic was a few years ago, the Indy Lights cars. If you ever did that with an Indy Lights car, it would just set up this thing to understeer so badly that you would be so late getting back to throttle. Yeah. And so it's interesting that, you know, we know that. I mean, it works in some cars and some cars it doesn't. But the interesting thing is that he found, and then you found that worked in those cars.
It did. It worked in the GT3 Cadillacs for sure. Yeah, it worked. And it was interesting. And again, you had to be selective on which corners. Absolutely, you had to be selective on which corners. You know, it wasn't like all the slow corners or all the medium corners you could do it. But some of them it worked well. It worked well. Yeah.
So then it becomes, well, first of all, you add that to your driver's toolbox, right? It's one more little technique I've got in the toolbox, and I can pull that out if I need to. Was it a matter of through the weekend you would go, I'm going to try that? Was it a conscious thing of I'm going to try that? Or I don't think this corner is going to take that? How did you approach that? I'm curious.
Well, yeah. Looking at data, I knew where he was doing it. And with his experience, I just tried it on the corners where he was doing it, and it made a difference. Yeah.
But did you ever get to
But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it brilliantly to start with. What I was doing is, because on the, you can look at the percentage of gas that he used, and it was not much at all. It wasn't to rotate the car. It was just taking advantage before you went back to balanced gas. And it was almost an assumption that the tires were not at 100% grip. Yeah. Because if your tires were at 100% grip and you did that, like you say, you would upset the car. So it's almost like we always overbrake a tiny, tiny bit, because otherwise we'd be sliding back in the car into all the corners, right? And it worked on, I think it was 3 corners that he was doing it on, I think it was at Sears Point. And it worked. Yeah, it worked. But it wasn't like I could just look at the data and go and do it, Ross. I had to learn it. I had to learn to do it. And for me, it wasn't necessarily quicker all the time until I figured it out. And it wasn't something that I dropped into to do all the time. But there were certain corners where I would use that because it felt comfortable and it was quicker on the data. So I would do it this way, and then I'd do it the other way that I was more normally doing things. If you see an impact on the data, then you have to do it.
Yeah. And I have to guess that what it did was so now you began accelerating from 73 miles an hour as opposed to 72.5 miles an hour, right?
Yeah, you exactly. That's a fast corner. So it was more
maybe more like
probably
a 50.
Lower than that. But yeah, it was more corners that were lower than that. But it was essentially you gained in that section. It may be that you actually got back to 72.5 miles an hour. It was almost like you just blipped in the middle, and then you would gain a little bit in that, literally where that little bump was, and then you'd be back to the same speed. I just wouldn't have the bump. So there's only so much grip in a slow speed corner. That's it, right? I mean, there's no more grip. If you're on basically the same line and the same surface, 2 different cars, but the same tire, it's a mechanical grip corners. That's where it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny how we're a weird bunch of people, aren't we? You know, we're obsessing over half a tenth of a second.
Yeah.
But you add up those half a tenth of a second 3 times on a lap. Now you got a tenth and a half. And
That's
a tenth
it.
and a half is the world to it.
Yeah, because when you're in qualifying and you're, a couple of tenths back from your teammate, let's say, and you go, okay, what are you going to do? Cry about it? No, you see where it is and you try and figure it out. But he's over there figuring out where you're quicker, and it just ended up that it was 2 tenths. So, yeah.
So if I had Johnny here right now and I said, okay, Johnny, what'd you learn from Andy? What do you think he'd say?
Social skills, maybe.
Okay, good answer.
we would end up talking about the social stuff more. I can't say if he learned anything on the racetrack at all, but we became really good friends. So, more like just having fun outside. I don't know what he'd say he'd learned on the racetrack. You'd have to ask Johnny on that one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I'll do that. So, hey, anytime that you've had a long career, you can't help but kind of at some point kind of look back and go, geez, if I'd only known that then, that would have made a big difference. What are some of the things that you wish you'd known back then?
I think there's not a huge amount of look back saying, if only. I think it did take me certainly a while to learn to go quick in certain places or with certain cars at certain times in my career, like when Jochen Rohr gave me the chance to get in the GT1 car with Allan McNish. I was fast relative to, Jochen, and I was fast relative to some of the other guys. But when Jochen decided to step out of the car, he just felt the car was a little bit too much and he wanted to go for a championship. And I was the one leading the championship. So, God bless him. He got out of the car and he said, I'm going to bring this guy in from Porsche. They're going to, work with me. Lo and behold, it was Allan McNish. And so one of the things it's your ego has to just stand by, and you see Allan in the car. He gets in this car coming out of F1 and basically says, nothing. He just drives the car like I'm driving a rental Cadillac. It's sliding it around. He's doing this. It's crazy stuff. And I think it's just something that's a reality. If you don't have a lot of basics to fall back on, because I didn't race anything when I was younger, I think some of I would have been, there's no regret in it. It's just a fact. I had to work really hard to catch up, to try and catch up to people. And the lucky part was, I guess, even though I had a chance, I did catch up fairly quickly. I think if I'd had more of the basic knowledge of how to drive cars on racetracks when I started, it would have been interesting to see. I don't know that the career path would have been a whole lot different, Ross, but it was really mentally taxing sometimes to get in a car. Like the first time I got on slick racing tires, I never had any experience. And then you get in the middle of these guys have all got slick tire experience. It's like you say, well, what's the big deal? You just got more grip. But yeah, then it starts drizzling. And you've just in your mind, it's like, I'm going to die. This car can't possibly grip. And then you've got guys flying by you with going like, well, this is crazy. Okay, all right, I'll go faster. And luckily you don't crash. So I think at various times it was really high stress pushing myself to catch up to some of these guys, because you get on a factory team and it's like, yeah, you're supposed to know what you're doing completely immediately, or and I was playing catch up a lot of times, and it was an interesting run. But I think just it would have been very much helpful to have some idea of racing cars from being younger. I think it would have been very helpful. And some of these young guys now that I'm really old now, but like Alec Udell. Alec was at the HSR race at Daytona in 2019, and I was racing that GT3 Ferrari. It's a 2011 car, good car, but it's the very first generation of the GT3s, and right at the beginning of it. And Alec was in I think a 2018 or 19 GT3 Cup car. And we had a phenomenal, it was nighttime. We had a great battle, the whole session, the whole 40-minute race. It was a fantastic race. And it was like this kid, he's young, but he's got so much experience. And he drove brilliantly in the sense that we raced together. I passed him at one point and racing close, and the brakes on the Porsche were a little bit better than the Ferrari's older system, I guess. But the Ferrari's a little bit faster on the straightaways. So we had a good, really good race. But I'm thinking to myself, me at his age, not a chance. I would have been way back in the bus, it was amazing. And he was super good. I mean, it's like tremendous track presence, knowledge, awareness, and running together and running hard. I mean, running really hard. It was good. But, I think that's it, Ross. If anything, that would be it. Just the fact that through the years, there are memorable days and weekends when I knew I was really drinking from the fire hose, right?
So, I mean, it sounds to me like you have learned how to learn fast.
Yeah.
Do you have can you share something with us that it's like, here's how I approach learning. It's this, or, whatever. Do you have a system, a process? I mean, maybe not a deliberate thing or a conscious thing, but how do you approach learning?
Well, can you be more specific on the sense of it, like a different car, because it's specifically on racetracks? Because obviously different things, but is it racetracks? Is it a race car, or is it just life in general?
Sure. Okay. Well, and to be more fair here, then I guess is, I've because I, like you, I love to learn, and I've actually studied how people learn, and I'm kind of curious. Some people, they read, and if they read something, they can kind of turn that into a picture, and then it's like, well, I turn that picture into an action. And some people really are strong in using mental imagery or visualization. Some people are less reliant on that. Some people are, you've already said that it's almost like you can look at a squiggly line on the data trace and go, okay, now I'm going to go and match that. I've had drivers where, I would actually draw a brake pressure trace and say, go do that. And they could do it. And I'd do it for another driver and they couldn't do it. So I'm kind of curious, kind of what has worked for you to help you learn quicker. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I think it helps to have a reasonable processor between your ears. But I think I've been lucky to have a reasonable mind as far as that goes. Visually is where I seem to have a good reference. If I can see something, and reading is one thing, I'm reasonable at processing what I read, but if I can see something on a trace, I can visualize it and I kind of understand what I need to do. It's not a process in the sense I'm not tremendously structured about it. What does help me, and I think has helped me all along, and I think this is might answer your question, is having a little IT company, and early on in racing, being able to, there was a payphone at Sebring. I still remember calling in payroll, coming off the phone because I had to go qualify a car, and my teammate was studying, meditating, and I come back in, grab my stuff, go out, and qualified well, a little bit better than them. And they said, how do you do that? I said, do what? Said, you were doing your payroll. We were talking about your company. You put the hat on, you get in the car, and then you go. And I think if I have some kind of learned skill, whether it's natural or not, I realize that I have to shut down everything else that I possibly can when I get into the situation like a race car. And we have a lot of things going on in our heads, whether it's personal, whether it's business, whether it's not feeling 100%. And I think I've been lucky or good at making sure when I put my gloves on and do this deal, that's the switch for me. My wet, sweaty gloves or whatever, that's a switch. And that's it. It's like, that's probably the thing that has helped me more than anything. And if there is a procedure, that's it. I have my gloves. You'll see me getting in a car with my helmet, everything, and the gloves will be sitting somewhere where I'll grab them. And the last thing I do is put them on. Because if there's somebody with a picture taking, or somebody brings their son around and say, "Oh, Andy, hey, how you doing?" You cannot be so fragile mentally. And I saw early on people that were fragile mentally, and all you had to do was talk to them and say, "Hey, good luck today." And they would be shocked because they were in the middle of this meditation routine. So I realized that I don't want to do that. But when I'm a kind of a personal person, so personable. So I get distracted easily in the house or doing stuff. I'm terrible. I mean, I go this way and then I go that way. But when I can't do that in a race car.
Right.
So I realized that just because my mind's wandering all over the place, when I'm here and the hook, as I call it, to get me mentally focused is putting on the wet gloves years ago, the leather, and that were all wet and yucky. That's what started it. And that threw away the payroll thoughts. It threw away the fact that what am I going to do in turn one, right? You had a sleepless night thinking of 1,000 scenarios in turn one for the race because you were in the third row or the second row. What am I going to do? Left, right, center. And it's like, it was always 1,000 of first thing you never thought of, by the way. So never do that. Whoever, don't do it. Just forget it. Whatever happens, just react at the time. But I think it's focusing, being able to focus and stay focused. And then your processor is picking up everything you need to do, whether it's figuring out what Johnny was doing in turn 3 and 4, or whether it's figuring out what's going to happen in the race. And I think that may be something. I don't know if that answered the question. Maybe.
Yeah. And I love the, putting the gloves on and interlocking your fingers. That's your trigger, right? That's
my physical trigger, right? It's my hook. I call it hook trigger. Yeah, absolutely. And I still do it.
Yeah.
I still do it.
It's funny. That those kinds of things are routines, rituals. And some people actually kind of go, well, it's kind of like a superstition. And to me, like a superstition is a ritual that you can't control.
Yeah, I'm not that.
But I don't want that. But putting your gloves on and doing that's something you can control. And that's no different than a basketball player bouncing the ball 3 times before shooting a free throw, or a tennis player bouncing the ball twice and then serving, or whatever, right? That's a routine that kind of triggers your performance at that point.
Yeah. And
my routine, part of my routine is putting my gloves on, and I always put my left glove on first.
Okay.
And it's funny, like I will go and do yard work at home, and I grab some gloves because I'm going to go out there and dig or something like that. And it's like, I got to put my left glove on first because I'm going to go perform my yard work the best I can. So it's a routine for me, and it's triggering that. I think it does trigger the processor. It kind of like it wakes the processor up or something.
Oh yeah. And blocks out. It's almost like you focus, and that's it, because the chaos and the noise of everything else it should not be there. It's once you get going, and it's incredible. It doesn't matter what racing you do. If you could do a champ car race in somebody's old BMW 318 from 1984. It doesn't matter. If I'm in the car, it's the same routine, same thought process. I give it the same effort. It's fine. I have to do that. I can't not do it now.
Yeah. So I'm curious, during the race, can you give an example of what's going through your mind? Like, are you thinking real big picture strategic? Do you bring it back into I need to give it that little blip of the throttle in turn 3, or is it, I'm going to set up that pass there. I guess, how strategic, how tactical are your thoughts, or do you even have those? Or are you just plain doing?
I think there's a lot of plain doing, because generally you're maxed out. If you find that the person ahead of you is just going away, but you're maxed out, you just have to see, well, hopefully he comes back to me. Maybe traffic will play a part in this. and you just deal with it. If I'm with somebody where we're racing, where the cars are very, very similar, like with Alec in that 2019 race, or Fred Pourdad, the World Challenge champion from last year. We had a race in Mid-Ohio last year. He was in his GT3R and I was in the Ferrari at Mid-Ohio. That was a tough race. So it depends where you find yourself. And, in particular, the second race, at the start of the race, we had one set of tires for both races. So the second race, Fred, I managed to, win the first race. And I thought the second race is going to be tough. I have the old tires. Then Fred's behind me, they put the brand new slicks off the tire warmers on his Porsche. And I'm like, it's going to be tough. It's a hot Ohio day. And I was on pole because I won the first race out of the sprint race. And he was on me for the whole race. The mindset when you've got somebody that you cannot make not even a millimeter. Now, he was quicker, but he couldn't get by. Traffic became a thing because I was a little bit better through traffic, or a little bit more lucky through traffic. So I get a tiny bit of a gap, but he'd then come right back on me again. But that mindset there is different than when I was trying to get by him in the first race. And I was wondering, where can I actually get him? And, that was more strategic. Like, I've got to get him here or down into 5. I think I can get him down to 5. And I'm waiting because he was going really good. And there was nowhere, Mid-Ohio, it's hard to pass. Yeah. But because I was on him, the only place you can pass essentially is turn 5, right? So you absolutely have to have the keyhole perfect. So every lap, I made sure that I was as perfect as I possibly could be in the keyhole. Don't try and pass him going in. Just wait, because the only place you're going to get him, because his car was really good and narrow through turn 1. And I was always losing a little bit coming out because the Ferrari was Gen 1 GT3. It wasn't quite as good. But coming out, I was I could draft him and maybe pass him on the straighter if I was right on his paint. Sure enough, he made the slightest error coming out of the keyhole later on in the first race. And I was on him on the paint. He moved across to, gentleman's, like, he's racing me, but I'm squeezed inside, made the pass. But that's one strategy because we were racing really hard. I mean, the guy won the World Challenge Series last year. He's a really good guy, a really good racer. I'd never seen him before. Had a great time, but that was strategic in the first race. And then in the second race, I'm like, oh boy, he's got brand new sneakers, and I got the old tires, and it was a whole different mindset. I wasn't blocking him. I just had to absolutely be as perfect as I possibly could. And I think it just depends on the situation. I'm sorry if that was a bit of a long answer to that question.
No.
It depends on the situation.
What's the one thing I hate about podcasts is it's only audio, and there's no visual, because I just see your face lighting up, smiling, talking about all this stuff. And it's obvious that after all these years, and hey, you and I are the same age, so I can kind of pick on us and say we're,
No, the age is the reality of life.
Yeah. But I can see that you love this just as much as you ever have.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's because I got in so late. You know what I mean? I don't know if this childlike, enthusiasm is just because that's the way I am, I guess. I'm enthusiastic about lots of things, but I don't know. And I see some of the drivers can be a lot younger than me, and they're a bit jaded. And it's like, man, you're getting in a race car, man.
Yeah,
it's all good. It's all good, So I don't know. Maybe it's just a personality. I don't know. But I love this stuff. And it doesn't matter if I come in second, third, or fifth. It doesn't matter. I mean, it was just the strategy between those two races at Mid-O was completely different. And, you had to execute. If I'd made a mistake, Fred would have been gone. But I just managed to work the traffic a little bit. And, but man, I mean, the guy is great. It was great. It was just great. Anytime you can have a good race, it's awesome.
Yeah. And sometimes it's that much more fun when you've had that kind of a battle. And you leave that day and you go, I did my job today.
Yeah. And Fred, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, sir. And Fred was an absolute, I think he loved it. I mean, I'd never met him before. On both the races, we had a really good race, and I think he genuinely really enjoyed both races, and it was great. And that's the whole thing, you win second, it's okay. Have a good race.
Yeah. So Andy, to wrap up, can you give listeners one piece of advice, kind of your speed secrets for the day? The one thing you'd tell a driver. Last time, I think your speed secrets was along the lines of keeping your eyes up and looking ahead or something like that. So yeah. I'm going to challenge you here to think of something that, and maybe it's that give that throttle a little blip or test that at some point. I don't know. One piece of advice.
I think we already spoke about it, Ross, is honestly, having spent a little time now coaching drivers, and whether they are pro racers or whether they are track day people that just want to go faster, the mental side, make sure your head is in the right place when you start to get out on the track, whether it's on the pace lap, whether it's practice, whatever it is, because you cannot be thinking about the setup. You cannot be thinking about a person who may be around you, or you have to have an awareness of that. Get your head in the right place. And if you don't have a hook, like the gloves or something to mentally switch you into that, maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you had maybe personal issue. Maybe you're not feeling 100%, but you can deal with it. You're getting your head in the right place again will take your mind off that too. And I think the mental focus and maybe finding a hook, if you don't have one, a physical hook, to switch your mind into doing the job, getting the job done.
Well, and to me, that is a practiced skill, whether we're born with some of that or not, whatever, but it is something that you can improve. And the reason that when I'm doing yard work, I put my left glove on first is because I'm practicing it, and I'm practicing switching my brain into, this is what I'm going to focus on right now. And, so I practice that all the time. And so when I do get into a race car, it's no different. It's just like my gloves on, left glove on. Now I'm switched on. It's ready to go.
Yeah. And if we don't switch the mind on and we do have other chaos, other noise in there, you are not going to perform at your optimum. We can all make mistakes, even if we are at the best mentally. We're just human beings. But to put chaos in there and noise in there and confusion in there, along with trying to race, you're not going to do a good job.
Yeah. Hey, Andy, how do people learn more about what you're doing, keep up with what you're doing, all that kind of stuff?
Well, andypilgrim.com has racing schedules, and that's an easy one. Has the history, has a lot of the race results from going back to the 1800s. And then we've got the traffic safety. Any interest in the traffic safety work is tsef.org. tscf.org, which stands for Traffic Safety Education Foundation, which is also, you can do the whole thing, but tscf.org is a lot shorter.
Okay. Well, I'll put those in the show notes. And Andy, thanks again for being on the show. This is always fun when we get a chance. We were talking earlier that before we got started here, that this sport is, there's so many cool people in it, but it depends on where you are and what you're doing. We can go, we've gone years not seeing each other, and then then you see each other, and other people in the sport, I see them all the time, and other people I don't see for years. So it's always great when we can catch up doing this.
Yeah. And when you do, it's just like old friends, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me again, Ross. It's been a pleasure again. Thank you.
Well, and I know listeners will be thanking you because you shared some really cool stuff today, and I think they're all going to go away thinking about that and going, that hook, I need to get my head in the game. So,
good.
Well, hey, thanks, and keep learning and having fun out there.
Will do. I hope to see you again soon, mate.
Yep.
Did you know Ross's Speed Secrets books are the #1 best-selling race driving technique books in the world? For example, if you're a race driver or want the most of your high-performance driving, you'll want Ultimate Speed Secrets. It covers everything from the ideal cornering line to vehicle dynamics and car setup, the all-important mental game, as well as how to make a career in motorsports. For many drivers, this is the go-to resource, something you can go back to over and over again throughout your driving career. Ross's latest book is The Lost Art of High-Performance Driving. If you're wondering how to get the most out of your modern high-performance car and have a passion for being the best driver you can be, both on the track and the street, you'll want to read this book. Not only does it give you tools and techniques, it will also help you develop the motivation to take your driving to the next level. You can check out all of Ross's books at speedsecrets.com/books or buy them at Amazon or any book retailer. It's a chance to read, keep learning, and have some fun.